I'd like to invite now Lara Vojnov, Diagnostics Advisor in the Global HIV, Hepatitis, and STI programs at WHO, to present some updates in HIV treatment monitoring. Lara leads the normative guidance development and country support for HIV, hepatitis, and STI diagnostics. Lara, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. Today, we released a policy brief that I hold here entitled "The Role of HIV Viral Suppression in Improving Individual Health and Reducing Transmission." In 2020, when we started to reflect on our treatment monitoring algorithm, we commissioned a series of systematic reviews to look through and think about the role of lower levels of virus in not just individual health, but also in transmission. Also today, The Lancet has published a systematic review that looked at the risk of sexual transmission when people living with HIV have lower viral loads. This systematic review comprised of 8 studies and over 7,500 serodiscordant couples. 3 studies within the systematic review, including HPTN 052, showed no HIV transmission when a person living with HIV had a viral load of less than 200 copies per ml. And in fact, most transmission events occurred when the person living with HIV had a viral load that well exceeded 30,000 copies per ml. An additional 4 prospective studies, including the seminal Quinn study from Rakai, there were over 300 transmission events. However, none were in people living with HIV who are considered stably suppressed on ART. Among all of the studies, and again, over 7,700 serodiscordant couples, there are only 2 potential cases of transmission when a person living with HIV's viral load was less than 1,000 copies per ml. In these 2 cases, it was about 700 and 850 copies per ml. However, and this is very important to note, in both of these cases, the viral load test was taken more than 50 days prior to the transmission event, casting significant doubt as to whether that viral load was truly below 1,000 copies per ml at the time of transmission. Unfortunately, there are no studies that have yet been identified evaluating the HIV transmission risks when using and sharing injected drug use equipment. Now, taking a look at the evidence, as WHO tends to do, we wanted to convene, and we did convene, a series of expert consultations to reflect upon this evidence, to think about the benefits and the potential harms, if any, think about how the impact of positive messaging and that positive messaging could have for people living with HIV, and importantly, really understand or try to understand some of the ongoing challenges that people living with HIV face with regards to stigma, discrimination, and criminalization, and what we could say as public health messages to support some of these efforts. And with that, we've developed this policy brief that's been released today. And within this policy brief, some of the overarching or the main overarching theme is really thinking about and encouraging clear, celebratory messages for people living with HIV. And we've tried to do this thinking about 3 categories of viral load. The first category is undetectable viral load. We're redefining this to mean not detected by the test or the sample type used. There's no measurable virus. Based on the Lancet systematic review, there's 0 risk of transmission to the sexual partners and minimal risk of mother-to-child transmission. Let me repeat that. People living with HIV who have an undetectable viral load have 0 risk of transmitting HIV to their sexual partners. Now, the next category, the suppressed category, this is when a person living with HIV has a detectable viral load, but equal to or less than 1,000 copies per ml. It means there's some virus replicating and present. It could be due to missing doses, recent treatment initiation, or drug resistance. People living with HIV who have a suppressed viral load have almost 0 or negligible risk of transmission to their sexual partners, again, based on the Lancet systematic review that's been published today. The final category is for unsuppressed viral loads, and that's when a viral load is greater than 1,000 copies per ml. There's significant virus replicating and present. Again, it could be due to missing doses, recent treatment initiation, or drug resistance. Unfortunately, people living with HIV who have an unsuppressed viral load are at increased risk of falling ill and or passing the virus on to their sexual partners or children. One thing I do want to note on this slide is that the only reason that the suppressed category is in yellow or could be considered a cautionary color has nothing to do with risk of transmission. It's simply because we don't currently know the risk to the individual health of people living with HIV who have a suppressed viral load, particularly now that we're scaling up and accelerating implementation and uptake of optimized triple dolutegravir-based regimens. To date, we have not seen treatment failure amongst people living with HIV taking those regimens. The ultimate goal, and we really want to emphasize that the ultimate goal for all people living with HIV is to reach and sustain undetectable viral loads. But at the same time, we feel that it's critical to celebrate not just people living with HIV who have an undetectable viral load and at zero risk of transmitting HIV sexually, but also celebrating people living with HIV who have a suppressed viral load and therefore have an almost zero or negligible risk of sexually transmitting HIV. We also thought it was very important to highlight that the majority of people living with HIV are not at risk of sexually transmitting the virus. We worked with Jeffrey Eaton's group, who published some of this work in CROI earlier this year, to understand the proportion of viral load categorization of all people living with HIV and by their risk of sexual transmission. And what you can see on the left-hand side, and these are from the FIA studies, is that over 70% of people living with HIV have an undetectable or a suppressed viral load, and therefore are not at risk of transmitting HIV to their sexual partners. All of the transmissions that we do see are unfortunately from those who are not yet aware of their status and are undiagnosed, untreated, and unsuppressed. And this is a real hope that we prioritize and focus on identifying all people living with HIV who remain undiagnosed and ensuring they are initiated and sustained on optimized treatment. There are two additional key considerations that we include in this document. Number one is that HIV viral load test results can be a real motivation for adhering to treatment and achieving the ultimate goal of being undetectable. But we know that a lot of people living with HIV don't have access to viral load testing, and that's included in developed settings, unfortunately. And so coupling that and looking at the evidence, not just from the Lancet Systematic Review, but there's also been a systematic review from PLOS Medicine that came out last year that found that current WHO pre-qualified tests, including point-of-care assays and including alternative sample types such as dried blood spots, can support the goals of treatment programs to accurately measure and report viral load test results as unsuppressed, suppressed, and undetectable. This shouldn't be a conversation of plasma versus dried blood spots or anything of that sort. We should be expanding viral load access to all people living with HIV using all of the tools that we have so they can be aware of their status. And so finally, viral suppression remains a key global public health and individual goal. I think we all know the 95-95 targets, and I've touched on each of these different pieces and why they're all critical to ensuring we end the epidemic. And just want to highlight this last 95 goal of 95% of people on ART having viral suppression should be including not just those who have an undetectable viral load, but also those who have a suppressed viral load, and providing them not just the access to testing, but also their results. I want to end by acknowledging a number of people who have contributed significantly to this effort. On the left-hand side, you see all of the experts that were engaged in the consultations and were instrumental in supporting development of this policy brief. I want to acknowledge our esteemed leader, Meg Doherty, as well as the amazing Andy Seal, who provided considerable guidance along the way to get us to where we are today. I also want to acknowledge Laurent Poulon, who's unfortunately not here with us, but has done a remarkable job at making sure we get to where we are for myself, but also for all of our colleagues in a number of the documents that we're releasing this week. We have translated this policy brief into French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian, and these should all be available on the website this coming week. And I need to acknowledge and send my incredible gratitude to all of the WHO colleagues who are listed here, the IAS colleagues and others who have really reviewed both the English version as well as their language to make sure that these clear, positive, and celebratory messages are conveyed clearly in these translations for all people living with HIV. Thank you.